Hello there, Flip here, and today we're going to be talking about Kinich, I don't know. Another one of the leading Natlan 5-stars and going over his best artifacts, weapons, and teams, as well as how good I think he'll stand in the meta. But before we do that, as always, if at any point during the video you're entertained or informed, make sure to drop a like and even consider subscribing, as Natlan is around the corner and I'll try to keep you updated. So with that, let's begin. Alright, let's run through this since you should have seen the livestream, but as standard, Kinich's normal attacks do absolutely nothing of value to talk about. His elemental skill is the bulk of his kit where he enters his Night Soul Blessing state, which is just a fancy Natlan stance change. In this state, Kinich will grapple to an enemy and pressing the normal attack button will continuously fire loop shots. These loop shots are important as Kinich has a bar of Night Soul points, and when he reaches 20 of these points, he'll be able to fire off his Scale Spiker cannon for a big amount of damage. So his gameplay loop revolves around trying to get as many points as you can so you can fire as many of these cannons as possible, and this is further helped through him generating a dead zone that restores some points, and his Ascension 1 that will generate 7 points every 0.8 seconds when an enemy is in the burning state or hit by a Burgeon Core. The reason why this is even more broken than it seems as well is because this 0.8 seconds is limited per enemy, so if you have multiple enemies burning, you'll be able to fire significantly more cannons than you would in single target. Hopefully this isn't like a bug or anything. Now for his burst, he just casually has the coolest animation in the game, and then Naruto will be firing Dragon Breath attacks from above that will hit 7 times. This is just additional damage, but it's not an insane amount, so don't worry about building him on high ER or anything. It's just a way to give him some sustained AoE. This burst can also be used in burning teams to skip using his loop shots, as his burst will extend his skill duration, and if an enemy is burning during this time, then you can fire back-to-back cannons essentially, getting one for free. For talent priorities, level up his skill first, then his burst, and just ignore his normal attacks, they do absolutely nothing. Overall, Kinich is pretty solid. He's the first Dendro on-field DPS to be centered around attack, more than EM. But another thing I like is that his damage isn't tied to burning. He will always do the same amount of damage. Burning will just enable him to get some more cannon shots off, so he won't run into the Quicken or Emily problems where for enemies with innate auras they just lose a lot of their damage. The only thing I'm sort of concerned about is his AoE. Kinich does do lower personal damage than Mualani, who's in the same patch as him, and Mualani also gets a guaranteed AoE ability letting her hit all of her damage, where Kinich's loop shots are all single target and his Scale Spiker cannon is smaller than the size of a Furina Craboletta hit. Getting ratioed by a crab is diabolical work, and this wouldn't be a massive issue if he was a swirlable element, as you could use a grouper, but he's Dendro. And also, like with Mualani, there are also potential IR problems against really aggressive enemies. This isn't going to be as bad as with Mualani because look at his gameplay, he'll be able to strafe most enemies, but if you do get hit, you're losing like 1 or 2 cannon shots, which is a pretty big damage loss. Actually, tangent, he gets the same amount of interruption resistance as Jingcho with his rain swords up, but this isn't like a lot. Just because he gets some IR doesn't mean he can't get staggered. IR is only really super valuable when it can be stacked with other forms of it, like in Hu Tao's case with Jingcho. But that's enough of that, let's discuss his artifacts now. Like I said in my Mualani video, Genshin made this very easy. Just run the new artifact set Obsidian. You get 40% crit rate and a 15% damage bonus just for being a Natlan character, and here's a sheet of his artifact comparisons. The only issue that is possible with this set on Kinich is that unlike Mualani, who constantly drains Night Soul points, Kinich has to fire his first cannon shot off to get the 4-piece effect, so your first few attacks are going to have a lower crit rate, but other than that it's perfect for him. Quick note about Deepwood, it is equal to the Obsidian set if there's no other Dendrian on the team, though it is better to just have this artifact set on another unit, which you can slap on Emily, as it's very good offensively on her as well, or you can throw it on Jangling as she doesn't have high enough personal damage on these teams to where it's worth caring about. There has been a fly that has been buzzing around my ear this entire recording. I am going to crash. If you're looking for a day 1 set to use, then if you have any leftover pieces for farming for Furina or Fischl, you can throw on the Golden Trope set. You won't get the full effect, but it is still a 45% damage bonus to his elemental skill damage that's active at all times, in which most of his damage is elemental skill damage. Then you could also use the Burning Cell on him, which you'll be able to maintain full uptime on in most teams, which is pretty good. For main stats, you want to use ADC. There is nothing else here that is really changeable, especially if you're using Bennett. An attack goblet is still around 15% worse than using damage percent, and even though he uses burning in his kit, you don't build him around EM or burning damage. And with that out of the way, let's talk about his weapons next. Again, Hoya versus making this very easy, there is a new craftable that gives you elemental skill damage when you or your teammate trigger a pyro reaction. And this is a free craftable, you should always be aiming to use it if you don't have his better options. And as I said in my previous video with Mualani, if it is not on this list, it is worse than the new free craftable and therefore don't use it. Now let's explain some of these options in more detail. Fang is an extremely high base attack weapon with very low crit rate, which is good as you won't overcap as easy on the obsidian set. The weapon passive also looks significantly more complicated than it is. If you are using a Bennett and jangling team, you'll be able to max out and maintain all stacks for a 60% burst and elemental skill damage bonus, which is a fucking blow actually. Very good weapon overall. Next, assuming you get hit, Beacon is a pretty good weapon. Maybe just like wait for the enemy to attack you and then start your combo, I don't fucking know. The weapon does give crit rate, so you have to look for crit damage subs to avoid overcapping, though assuming you do that, it is quite solid. Gravestone is also just fine. I guess for bosses it performs the same as the Earthshaker, and in multi-wave or mobbing it'll be better due to the passive, so you can honestly just slap this on, especially with refines, and you'll be good. Serpent Spine is also a great weapon with nothing much else to add, just try not to get hit. Yeah, what, 5 years in and claymores still kind of suck? Let's just talk about his synergies now. Kinich's number one synergy as of now is Bennett. He's an attack scaler and Bennett gives him a ton of attack. I don't really know what else you want me to say. However, because Kinich moves around a lot, there are some practical issues to using Bennett, mainly just flying out of his circle due to how much he moves. Bennett's buff does last for around 2 seconds though, so as long as you can move back in quickly, it isn't massive, but still needs to be noted. And as I said before, Kinich does have some decent interruption resistance, but it's not a lot, so you are vulnerable to getting attacked if you stay in his ring. So Bennett is great for him damage-wise, but may be awkward in actual gameplay. A character that can help with Kinich's IR issues though is Dea. Like, I'm not memeing, Dea is good for both of the characters in the 5.0 update. You unfortunately can't afford to use her as a Bennett replacement though, as again losing Bennett is such a tremendous damage loss, but using them on double pyro team should be more than enough to give Kinich a very good defensive profile. We are not discussing that voice crack. As I said before, interruption resistance gains a lot of value when stacked, so you won't get knocked around as much either, meaning you can afford to stay in a circle without needing to strafe out of it like you're fighting a Dark Souls 2 boss. Dea can also buff with Deepwood or the Scroll set when she triggers burning, which is of course a nice buff to Kinich, but also to Emily, who is currently Kinich's best teammate, danger-wise. Emily doesn't really support on these teams, well, I guess the burning damage reduction is nice, but she just does a ton of damage, and double Dendro is nice as she lets Kinich burst more often for better AoE, and she can also front load damage with her burst, which is great in multi-wave situations. She just gives a lot of upsides to his general team playability. Though if you don't have Emily, you can replace her with Furina. Trying to sound excited in these videos is so hard, I'm never doing this again. The Furina and Bennett core is one of the strongest buffing duos in the game, on top of burning enabling forward vapes with Furina, while not tampering with the burning aura enough to mess with Kinich's cannon proc significantly. So you're getting high off-field damage while also buffing, making it relative if not sometimes better than Emily options, depending on the investment of your Kinich. Though that is only on paper, in practice I'm more willing to recommend Emily. Furina essentially just enhances Kinich's already established playstyle, where Emily enables his teams to have a strong form of AoE frontload through her burst, as well as making bursting every rotation on Kinich a possibility so his AoE issues are less apparent. So yeah, both Furina and Emily are pretty interchangeable for Kinich, though I do think Emily is slightly better. Then there's Zhangling, who's obviously good as well for off-field pyro, and because she isn't getting hyper buffed in this team, especially with Emily, you can just run her on Deepwood or on the new Nutland set, nothing much to say. That is going to be it for the synergies. Let's talk about his archetypes in more depth now. First you have pure burning teams. Wow, what a surprise. Bennett, another pyro, and your choice of Furina, Zhongli, or Emily. These teams are his best because they have the least gameplay issues and allow him to get the most cannon shots off in his rotations. All you have to do is ensure someone is holding Deepwood, and that is normally going to be Zhangling or Emily. This is the team you want to run on Kinich if you want to use him to his full extent and play him optimally. This is as of 5.0, things may change in the future. Burgeon teams exist with Kinich, so I guess I'll talk about them. Once again, you want to use Bennett. This is really non-negotiable compared to other Burgeon teams that used on-fielders with bad damage profiles. Kinich does enough damage that even on Burgeon teams, his damage is still something that needs to be cared about. And then from there, you can use Jingcho or Yulon as Hydra applicators as Furina is too slow to get any meaningful Burgeon counts, and you close out by using your power applicator of choice, which is generally Toma. This team runs into pretty big energy issues as you can't swap into Toma freely, unlike in Nahida driving teams, and leaning too much into ER leads to a general loss in Burgeon damage. You need around 200% ER or more even with Jingcho and Favonius and an R5 Cutane. So Good luck. I don't think it's worth it because you're either making a worse Burgeon team or a worse overall Kinich pure burning team. It's an option that exists, but it does have some issues. The last team archetype to discuss is Quicken teams because they're actually somewhat interesting. Unlike Emily, as I said before, burning doesn't actually increase his damage technically. It just makes him fire off more cannons, which becomes his increase in DPS. And even on Quicken teams, as long as you are getting his dead zone, he should be able to get off 4 cannon shots, which isn't horrible. And his Dendro application is okay. You get 4 from his cannon and around 4 to 5 from his loop shots. So if you really want, you can play pure Quicken teams with him, but I don't recommend it. The way you would build these teams is of course Bennett and then Fischl. From there you can slot in Nahida or Zhongli or Beidou, I guess. There is another way to play Quicken teams too, being Quick Burn teams. Quick Burn teams are a combination of Burning and Quicken, where because Burning doesn't immediately kill all your Quicken aura, they're able to coexist periodically, allowing for both Burning and Quicken to be proc somewhat consistently. For Dendro onfielders, this can be quite hard though, as you need really fast Electro and pretty slow Pyro, so the Quicken aura isn't eaten immediately. In which the only way to make that work currently is with the best Electro character Fischl, as she applies the most Electro, but keep in mind you will also need her C6 to have enough Electro for characters like Toma and Dea. Emily is also pretty much a must on these teams due to the sheer amount of damage she can do here, overusing someone like Nahida who still isn't benefiting Kinich a lot, even if he does some spreads. So your team composition would look something like this. And you should still be able to get a decent ratio of cannon shots, especially in AoE content where there'll be more enemies burning than Fischl can generally keep up with, which would actually be a good thing in this team. All in all, Kinich pure burning teams are his most functional, with everything else working but not being that noteworthy. Now with that covered, let's talk about his Constellations. I don't know what happened to Genshin and Natlan, but they for some reason super toned down how complex Constellations are compared to some of the Fontaine characters. And I just want you to know, I am not complaining, I'm just saying. For reference, his C1 will increase his movement speed. Also, his cannon gets an additional 100% crit damage, like you see what I mean with the simplicity? And this is going to be a 21% damage increase over C0. So again, like with Mualani, assuming you're going from the craftable, the signature weapon is a much bigger damage increase. His C2S standard is going to be a good stopping point. It reduces enemies' Dendro resistance by 30%, and your first cannon shot gets more AoE and 100% more damage, which for someone lacking in AoE is nice for his kit. The Dendro resistance reduction also means that you don't have to run Deepwood in his teams, as the resistant shreds gain less value the more they are stacked, as they are halved when they reach 0%, so stacking both Deepwood and this would be unnecessary. 27% damage increase from C1. C3 is plus 3 to his skill, nothing much to say, another 22% damage increase. C4 gives him 5 energy when he attacks essentially, every 2.8 seconds. And since it's every 2.8 seconds, it's essentially 15 energy in his damage window, making him a 55 cost. Lowering his energy requirements by about 20%, and also his burst just deals 70% more damage because why not? 8.2% increase from C3. And to double down on his burst scaling, you now get plus 3 levels to his burst, which is a small 5% damage increase. The fucking fly is literally on my laptop. Fuck you. His C6 just makes his cannons go on steroids, where after hitting an opponent it will bounce between opponents for an attack with a 700% motion value. This ends up being a 45% damage increase from C5, and overall a 128% damage increase from C0. So Pretty Nut's vertical scaling, this is actually higher than Mualani's, and it's funny because his cons literally do not offer a gameplay change at all. They just increase his damage, which whatever works works. If you want to vertically invest into him, even though his weapon is quite nice, if you have the pulse for it, I'd honestly just recommend going straight for C2, just so you get the AoE on his first attack, as it's something he lacks in his base kit. But if you want more damage, then going for his weapon and then C1 would be the play. But no need to dote, that is all there is to the guide section of this video. All in all, Kinich is a solid DPS. His teams are a decent bit above Risley in terms of theoretical DPS, which can be worse depending on his consistency in staying in Bennett's circle. So he isn't anything game breaking, especially with his lack of AoE, but he offers a new unique playstyle, and he's most likely going to get a sizable buff with the release of Malvika, due to things like his passive, which can really benefit from other Natlan characters. But that is future impact. As he stands now, he's just what you'd expect from an average DPS unit, which is fine. I really don't know what else to say. But with that, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts on Kinich. I still don't know, as I'd love to hear and I respond to almost every single comment. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace.